They say a woman becomes strong only when she has no one left to lean on. I learned that the hard way, and I promise, by the end of this story, you'll never underestimate your own strength again. Those were the words my son, Ethan, said to me. Right there, in my own living room. The room I'd spent years decorating for birthdays, Christmas mornings, and late-night talks. Now it felt cold, almost foreign, like I didn't belong in my own house anymore. He stood near the doorway, arms crossed, his wife behind him holding their baby. Her silence was louder than his words. Ethan's voice shook, but his eyes didn't. That's what hurt the most. Mom, you can't keep living here. We need our space. You'll figure something out, you always do. I wanted to laugh, to remind him that the something I always figured out was him. His school fees. His college rent. His car. Every late bill I covered with the tips from my diner shifts. But I didn't laugh. I just stood there, holding the same coffee cup I'd made for him earlier that morning. When they left, I stared at the door, still swinging from when he slammed it. It was like my whole life had walked out with him. The next few days were a blur. The silence was unbearable. Even the refrigerator humming felt too loud. Bills started piling up on the kitchen counter: mortgage, electricity, medical insurance. My arthritis meds weren't cheap, but I couldn't stop taking them. I'd worked at Maple Diner for 22 years before my hands gave out. After that, Ethan promised he'd take care of me, like I took care of him. Promises, they sound so beautiful until you need them to mean something. I called him once. He didn't pick up. Texted twice. I just want to talk. No reply. The third time, I saw the message turn blue, and still nothing. I went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and barely recognized the woman staring back. Puffy eyes. Streaks of gray hair that I used to cover with box dye. The mirror didn't lie, but it also didn't pity me. That night, I cried till my chest hurt. But when the tears finally stopped, something inside me shifted. I realized nobody was coming to save me. Not my son, not his wife, not anyone. And that's when it hit me. If my own child could abandon me, maybe it was time I stopped living for him and started living for me. I pulled out my old folder, the one labeled papers. Inside were old pay slips, a faded house deed, and a letter from the community college I once applied to before Ethan was born. I smiled for the first time in months. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the first chapter of something new. I closed my eyes, whispered to myself, "You are not a burden. You are a woman rebuilding her life." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The next morning, I woke up early, before the sun, before the loneliness could hit me. I packed 2 small bags. One for clothes, one for memories. When I closed the door behind me, it didn't feel like leaving home. It felt like escaping a grave I didn't know I was buried in. I moved into a small room at the Evergreen Women's Shelter in downtown Tulsa. It wasn't much, just a single bed, a shared bathroom, and a noisy air conditioner that rattled like it was on its last breath. But it was mine. The staff there, mostly women, didn't ask too many questions. They just handed me a form, some instant coffee, and a smile that felt warmer than my own son's had in years. I spent the first week crying in silence. But the second week, I started watching the others. There was Maria, a nurse who left her husband after 20 years of emotional abuse. Tina, who was rebuilding her life after losing everything in a divorce. And Cheryl, a retired teacher who'd been kicked out by her daughter. Different stories. Same heartbreak. And yet, every night, they laughed together at the dinner table like survivors who'd seen the worst and still found joy. Something inside me started to wake up again. One afternoon, I went to the library across the street. I sat by the window, reading job postings taped to a bulletin board. Receptionist wanted part-time. Cleaning help, flexible hours. Community college courses, free for senior citizens. That last one stopped me cold. Community college. I pulled that old letter from my bag, the one from 26 years ago, and read it again. Congratulations. You've been accepted into the business administration program. Back then, I never went because I found out I was pregnant with Ethan. Now, standing there with that faded paper in my trembling hands, I felt unfinished. Maybe it wasn't too late. I went back to the shelter and asked the social worker about enrolling. She smiled, handed me a form, and said, "You'll need an ID, proof of residence, and your high school transcript." That night, I dug through my bag, found my old driver's license, my electric bill, and a wrinkled high school certificate that smelled faintly of dust and old dreams. The next morning, I took the bus downtown, holding my papers like they were gold. It had been decades since I'd done something just for me. When I handed my enrollment form to the lady at the counter, she said, "Welcome back, Ms. Parker." For a second, I didn't even recognize the name. But it was mine, and I was claiming it again. That evening, I looked at myself in the shelter's cracked mirror. The same lines were still there, but something had changed behind my eyes. It wasn't youth. It was purpose. I whispered, "You may have lost a son, but you found yourself." And for the first time in months, the reflection whispered back. Finally, my first day back at school felt like stepping into another world. The hallways were full of 20-somethings glued to their phones, rushing between classes with coffee cups twice the size of mine. And there I was, 47 years old, clutching a secondhand backpack and shaking like a leaf. The girl at the front desk gave me a student ID badge that said Sandra Parker, Business Administration. I stared at it for a long time. It felt surreal to see my name next to something that wasn't emergency contact or parent. The first week was rough. My hands cramped while typing. I had to Google what PowerPoint was. Half the time, I couldn't hear the professor because my reading glasses kept slipping down my nose. But every night when I wanted to quit, I'd remind myself of that moment at the door, Ethan's voice saying, "You're just a burden." That sentence had built a fire in me I didn't know I had. I started recording lectures, staying late at the library, asking younger classmates for help. Some of them laughed behind my back. I know they did. But one girl, Kylie, she didn't. She sat next to me one day and whispered, "You remind me of my mom. She gave up her dreams too soon." That line stayed with me for weeks. I picked up a part-time job at a small motel near the highway. It wasn't glamorous, front desk at night, answering calls, checking in truckers, wiping counters. But it paid just enough to keep me on my feet. Every paycheck, I'd set aside $20 in a small envelope labeled Future. It sounds silly, but every time I slipped a bill in, it felt like I was buying back pieces of myself. 3 months in, I got my first A-grade, business communication. I cried right there in class. The professor walked over, smiled gently, and said, "Ms. Parker, you've got leadership in you. Don't waste it." Leadership. That word. I hadn't heard it used for me in years. I started volunteering to organize study groups. The same students who used to ignore me now asked for help with their projects. And for the first time in forever, I wasn't just surviving, I was becoming someone again. But life doesn't let you move forward without testing how much you've changed. One afternoon, after my shift at the motel, I got a call from an unknown number. When I picked up, I froze. It was Ethan. His voice was low, hesitant. "Hey, Mom. Look, I don't know how to say this. We're kind of in a tough spot. The baby's sick, rent's behind. I thought maybe you could help us out, just a few $1,000s, until we get back on track." For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. The same son who threw me out was now calling for help, the kind of help I once begged him for. I could hear his wife whispering in the background, "Just tell her it's urgent." That stung more than anything else. I stared at the motel's glass door, seeing my reflection, tired, older, but stronger. I gripped the phone tighter and said calmly, "Ethan, I don't have that kind of money. And even if I did, I think it's time you learned to figure something out on your own." He went silent, then hung up. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just sat there, staring at my envelope labeled Future. For once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. A week after Ethan's call, I woke up before dawn like always. The motel was quiet, just the hum of vending machines and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. For years, that reflection used to remind me of what I'd lost. Now it reminded me of what I'd survived. I smiled, even if it was a small one. Because finally, the woman staring back at me wasn't broken. She was rebuilding. I'd been saving for months now. Between my motel shifts and a small scholarship I'd earned at college, I'd scraped together almost $4,000. It wasn't much, but it was enough to move out of the shelter. The social worker at Evergreen hugged me tight when I told her. "You did this," she said. "Not luck, not pity you." I found a small studio apartment. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, and a window that faced a busy street. It wasn't fancy, but when I turned the key in that lock for the first time, it felt like victory. That key, I kept it on a chain around my neck for days. It wasn't just metal. It was proof that I could start over. Classes got tougher as I went on. Finance, business, law, management principles. They sounded intimidating, but I refused to quit. Whenever I got stuck, I'd stay up late, watching YouTube tutorials and scribbling notes until my hands cramped. Sometimes I thought about Ethan. Not with hate, more like distance. He'd chosen his path, and I was finally choosing mine. One day, after class, my professor pulled me aside. "Ms. Parker," he said, "you've got a natural head for operations. I have a friend who owns a small accounting firm. He's looking for someone dependable. Want me to put in a word?" I nodded, speechless. A week later, I walked into Henderson and Company, accounting wearing my thrift store blazer and the confidence I'd been building piece by piece. The owner, Mr. Henderson, looked me over and said, "You've got life experience, don't you? That's worth more than a fancy degree." He hired me on the spot. The first paycheck I got there, $1,200. I didn't spend a dime. I folded it, kissed it, and slipped it under my future envelope. Then I called the community college and paid my next semester in full. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was investing in myself. A few months later, I came home from work and found a letter slipped under my door. It was from Ethan. The handwriting looked shaky, like he'd hesitated with every word. "Mom, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said what I did. Things got hard and I took it out on you. We could really use your advice right now. Please call me." I sat there staring at it, my heart torn between anger and compassion. But instead of calling, I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer beside my key. Not to forget, but to remember. To remember how far I'd come, and how I'd promised myself never to go back to being someone's afterthought. That night, I made tea and looked out the window at the city lights. They flickered like small chances, each one waiting for someone brave enough to take it. And for once, I was that someone. It was a quiet Saturday morning when I heard the knock. 3 soft taps. Then silence. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I waited, hoping maybe whoever it was would just go away. But the knocking came again. And then, I heard his voice. "Mom, it's me. Please open the door." I froze. Ethan. After all these months, after that letter I never answered, he was here. I opened the door slowly. He stood there, thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. His wife, Lena, was behind him, holding their baby. The same baby I'd never even gotten to hold. "Can we come in?" he asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. They sat on my couch, the same one I'd bought secondhand after moving in. I could tell they were uncomfortable. The air was thick with all the things we hadn't said. Ethan looked down, fiddling with his wedding ring. "Mom, I was wrong. I treated you terribly. I thought I was doing what was best for my family. But I see now, I was just being selfish." I didn't say anything. I just stared at the little boy on Lena's lap, my grandson. He had Ethan's eyes. It hit me so hard I had to grip my cup just to stop my hands from shaking. Lena finally spoke. "We've been having a rough time. Ethan lost his job. We moved into a small place, but it's been hard. We don't have family nearby." Her voice cracked. And suddenly, the part of me that used to mother everyone tried to wake up again. But I caught myself. I took a deep breath and said softly, "Ethan, when you told me I was a burden, I believed you. For months, I lived with that pain. But now I know I'm not a burden to anyone. I'm capable. I'm strong. And I'm done being treated like I'm not." He lowered his head, silent. The baby started to fuss, and Lena bounced him gently. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Ethan whispered, "I don't want money. I just want you back in our lives." That line hit me deeper than I expected. But I didn't rush to forgive him. Because forgiveness, I'd learned, has to be earned, not begged for. So I told him the truth. "Ethan, I love you. I always will. But you have to understand, love doesn't mean letting someone hurt you twice. If you want me back in your life, you'll have to meet me as an equal, not as your obligation." He nodded slowly. I could see in his eyes he understood. For the first time, he saw me not as mom, but as a person. After they left, I sat in silence, staring at the closed door. The same door where he'd once left me behind. This time, it was me who closed it, calmly, on my terms. I looked at the keys hanging on the wall, the one to my apartment, to my freedom, to my life, and smiled. 2 weeks later, Ethan called again. Not to ask for help, but to invite me to dinner. He said, "We want you to meet the baby properly. No pressure, just family." Something about the tone was different, softer, humbler. So I agreed. At the dinner, things were awkward at first. But when that little boy, my grandson, reached out and grabbed my finger, something inside me healed a little. Ethan smiled. Lena teared up. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because they came back, but because I had built a life strong enough that I didn't need them to. That night, when I got home, I opened my drawer and looked at that old letter from Ethan, the apology. I folded it neatly, placed it under my future envelope, and whispered, "The past belongs here now." Things finally seemed peaceful. Work was steady, my grades were strong, and for the first time in years, I woke up without that tight knot of anxiety in my chest. But life always finds a way to test your strength just when you start feeling safe. One afternoon at the accounting firm, Mr. Henderson called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers. "Sandra, I hate to say this, but we've had some complaints. Someone called claiming you used to live in a shelter and can't be trusted with client data." My heart dropped. "Who said that?" I asked, my voice shaking. He sighed. "They didn't give a name, but they said they were family." I knew instantly. Ethan. Not out of cruelty, but embarrassment. He'd always cared too much about what people thought. Maybe seeing me rebuild myself made him feel small. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone, torn between fury and heartbreak. He was my son, my only child. How could he do this again? I thought of calling him, of yelling, of reminding him of every diaper I changed and every night I stayed up sewing his Halloween costumes. But instead, I did what the old me never would have done. I stayed calm. The next morning, I walked into Mr. Henderson's office with a folder of my work records. Clean audits, 0 complaints, and client appreciation emails. I placed it on his desk and said, "You hired me for my integrity, sir. I stand by it. Whatever my past is, it made me better, not worse." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "I know, Sandra. I just needed to hear you say it." And just like that, I kept my job. Later that week, Ethan called again, this time angry. "Mom, why'd you embarrass me at my friend's firm? Do you know how it looks when people hear my mother used to live in a shelter?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I clenched the phone tighter. "Ethan, what embarrasses you is what saved me. That shelter gave me a second chance. The same chance you threw away when you turned your back on me." He tried to interrupt, but I didn't let him. "You wanted me weak so you could feel strong. But I'm not that woman anymore. You don't get to define me now." He went silent. Then, just like before, he hung up. But this time, it didn't hurt. It felt like closure. A week later, Lena showed up at my apartment alone. She looked exhausted, holding the baby's bag on one shoulder. "Ethan's been drinking," she said quietly. "He's angry all the time. He keeps saying you chose strangers over him." I sighed. Part of me wanted to step in to fix things. But I'd learned that some lessons can't be taught with kindness. So I told her the truth. You can't save someone who refuses to grow up. I learned that the hard way. But if you ever need help, real help, you can come to me. Tears filled her eyes. She nodded and whispered, "Thank you." That night, I sat by the window, the city lights twinkling below. I thought about how strange life is, how the people you die for can be the ones who wound you the deepest. But I also realized something powerful. Every time someone tried to break me, I built a stronger version of myself. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor. And now, I was becoming a leader. The next day, I registered for a mentorship program at the college to help women over 40 return to education. When they asked what inspired me, I smiled and said, "A broken heart, and the will to never let it break me twice." By the time I turned 49, my life didn't look anything like it used to. I wasn't anyone's dependent, anyone's burden, or anyone's afterthought. I was Sandra Parker, office administrator, part-time student, and mentor to women finding their footing again. But when you rise, people notice, especially the ones who once doubted you. It started with a letter, a thick white envelope with notice of claim printed in bold. Ethan was trying to sell the old house, the one still under my name because I'd never signed over the deed. And now he wanted me to transfer it so he could clear some debts. The nerve. I sat at my small kitchen table, rereading the letter again and again. 20 years of mortgage payments. My entire savings gone into keeping that roof over our heads. And now my own son wanted to take it like it was some leftover piece of junk mail. No, not this time. The next morning, I went straight to Henderson's lawyer, a kind woman named Paula Green. She listened carefully, then said, "Sandra, he can't force you to give up the property. Legally, it's still yours. But if he's desperate, he might try to pressure you emotionally." I laughed bitterly. "He already has." Paula smiled. "Then it's time we put things in writing." She helped me file a protective ownership affidavit, securing my rights. Then she added something that stuck with me. People like you, Sandra, you don't just rebuild. You redefine what strength looks like. When Ethan found out, he exploded over the phone. Mom, how could you do this to your own family? That house could have saved us. I stayed calm. That house did save us, Ethan. For 20 years. You just don't remember who paid for it. He yelled through accusations, said I was selfish. And I listened, not because I believed him, but because I needed to hear how much power I'd taken back. When he ran out of words, I simply said, "You taught me that being quiet doesn't mean being weak. So I'll say this once and only once, that house is mine. My peace is mine. My life is mine." Then I hung up. For a long moment, I just stood there staring at my phone. That little piece of plastic that used to terrify me every time his name appeared. Now it was just a phone. Nothing more. A few days later, Lena called. Her voice was calm, almost relieved. Ethan's gone to rehab. He finally admitted he needs help. I closed my eyes, feeling a strange mix of sadness and pride. Sometimes strength means walking away. Other times, it means being the mirror that finally makes someone face themselves. Lena asked if I could visit when things settled down. I said maybe. But right now, I'm focusing on my next semester. Tell him. I hope he finds peace. She whispered. He's realizing you're stronger than he ever gave you credit for. That night, I sat at my desk finishing an assignment on leadership ethics. The topic was resilience in adversity. And without meaning to, I wrote about myself. About the woman who lost everything and built her life from scratch. About the mother who stopped begging for love and started respecting herself. About the silence, the mirror, the keys, all symbols of the woman I became. When I turned it in, my professor wrote one comment at the top. Sandra, your story could teach a generation what real power looks like. I smiled, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving my story. I was owning it. A year later, everything had changed. I'd graduated from community college, top of my class. Mr. Henderson promoted me to operations manager. And the women's mentorship program I joined? They asked me to lead it. Every Wednesday night, a group of women, some divorced, some widowed, some abandoned like me, sat in a circle at the library conference room. They'd look at me like I had all the answers. And I'd tell them the truth. You don't heal by waiting for an apology. You heal by becoming someone who no longer needs one. One evening after the session, I walked home alone. The air smelled like rain, and the streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement. I unlocked my apartment door, my own key, my own peace, and paused. There, sitting by the door, was a small box. No note. Just a package. I opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photo, me holding baby Ethan on his first birthday. Underneath, a letter. Mom, I'm sorry. For everything. I'm working on myself now. I understand what you did for me, and what I did to you. You were never a burden. You were my foundation. I hope someday I can make it right. Ethan. I didn't cry. I just smiled softly, placed the photo on my shelf beside my college diploma, and whispered, I already made it right. That night, I sat by the window, same city lights, same hum of life outside. But this time, I wasn't lonely. I was whole. My phone buzzed with a text from Lena, a picture of Ethan and their son at the park. He looked healthier, lighter. I typed back, tell him I'm proud. Then I turned off my phone and leaned back, breathing in the silence I once feared. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. A few months later, a journalist from a local magazine interviewed me for a feature on women who rebuilt their lives. She asked, if you could go back and say something to the woman you were 3 years ago, what would you tell her? I smiled and said, I'd tell her the pain was necessary. That being broken wasn't her ending. It was her beginning. On my way home that day, I passed by the Evergreen Women's Shelter, the place that gave me my first night of safety. I stopped, walked inside, and donated half my savings envelope. Future. When the receptionist asked if I wanted a receipt, I said, no, I already got what I needed from this place, my courage. She looked at me, eyes glistening. You'd be surprised how many women you've inspired, Sandra. I smiled. I'm not surprised anymore. That night, I stood in front of the mirror. The same mirror that once showed me a woman lost and broken. Now it showed me a woman who had faced betrayal, loneliness, and judgment, and still stood tall. I whispered to my reflection, you're not a burden. You're a legacy. And if you're listening to my story right now, I want you to remember this. No matter who leaves you, or how deep you fall, there's always a way back. You just have to believe that the person you see in the mirror deserves it. Because she does. Because you do.